Emily, thank you. I didn't think we'd be talking about this today. What do you make of this quick evolution, at least in terms of the headlines today, and specifically the choice?
I mean, the president has been known to make the decision that he thinks is right in the moment. I do know Senator Markwayne Mullin. He's a pleasure to deal with. I've briefed him many times. I think he'll do a great job.
A great job. Will confirmation be an issue, or are we going to have an acting secretary for the foreseeable future?
I mean, that's a difficult question to answer. I think that senators tend to be very kind to their own. He's got a lot of good relationships on the Hill, and I think that'll certainly play well for him.
Well, it's really remarkable here to see a turn like this, and I wonder how concerned you have been with a DHS that has been closed now for the better part of a couple of weeks, even as the domestic terror threat increases.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. The way that DHS is reworking itself is certainly a pivot moment in history. I particularly focus on cyber issues. So watching what's going on at CISA, where we're trying to sort of reset the way that we think about domestic cyber, has been difficult to watch. It's definitely a really important issue, and that I hope that Senator Mullin has time to focus on it.
Well, I'd love to hear from you about that a little bit more, Emily, as we break the news here. And now you have it redhead on the terminal. Markwayne Mullin tapped by President Trump to be the next Secretary of Homeland Security. We understand that cyber activity, and I heard some of this in the CrowdStrike conference call the other evening, cyber activity from Iran has been increasing. How capable is Iran in this sphere?
They really are quite capable. As we look at sort of our adversaries across the planet in the cyber domain, you definitely put Russia, China at the very top. China's been a rising power, but Iran is right there. We've seen them get increasingly aggressive with their cyber activity. They seem to be less constrained than others, perhaps, in the way that they think about attacks on civilian infrastructure. They went after our elections once upon a time. They've also gone after domestic infrastructure in the U.S. and water infrastructure, and that's quite concerning. So far, we're only sort of starting to see indications that cyber is going to be a factor in the current war, but I would expect for them to engage in that domain extensively at some point.
Well, you know, the president spoke a bit and not a lot by design about the extent to which we used cyber in Venezuela by knocking out the lights and helping to advantage our military. Is the United States employing those same technologies in Iran?
It does seem that way, that there's this layered effect that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs has talked about, Dan Kane, where you have joint operations between Space Force, Cybercom, and then various branches of our military sort of all operating in concert to create total superiority over Iranian air defenses and over the Iranian military in general. And if you can disrupt the command and control within a country like Iran, it can be very difficult for them to, in effect, fight back against a overpowering military force. So we are seeing that cyber warfare can make a big difference, especially in sort of setting the terms and conditions for a fight.
You know, both governments, Washington and Tehran, are promising a more intense phase in the bombing and missile war that we're witnessing here. Will there be a more intense phase when it comes to cyber? Does such a thing exist?
So it's hard to say at this point. I don't want to second guess what the Pentagon's going to do next. But really what we've seen cyber be effective at is two pieces. Number one is, like I said, this disrupting of command and control. And number two is really the psychological warfare. So far in this fight, we have seen that disruption piece. We saw internet connectivity in Iran drop off dramatically the morning that the bombing started. There's still sort of an open question on how much of that was the U.S., Israel trying to disrupt communications, and how much of it might have been Iran, in part, shutting down their own capability so that protesters and others couldn't coordinate inside Iran. And then the other piece is this psychological piece. So we've seen Israel in particular engage in psychological attacks where they do things like they hacked, apparently, a religious calendar app. It's Ramadan right now, so people use their calendar apps to do things like see when the prayer times are, see when they can break their fast at the end of the day. And messages appeared on one of these apps that said things like, it's a time for reckoning, abandon your regime, anyone who speaks out against the regime will be given amnesty. And this is really a way to try to undermine the power base of the Iranian regime. We've kind of gotten past those first two phases. There might be a time close to the end of the bombing campaign where you see the psychological aspect reappear, and perhaps trying to do things like punch some holes in Iran's VPN firewall so that the Iranian opposition can, in fact, talk to each other about coordination, about pushing back on whatever remnant of the regime is left over.
Wow, fascinating, Emily. What do you make of the talk today about the next regime? President Trump, in an interview with Axios, says he must play a role in choosing the next leader of Iran. Is this a plausible scenario? How would that work?
The Iranian people have had experience with foreign leaders trying to pick their leadership before. It's never gone
Especially from this
particularly
country.
well.
Yeah.
So it does seem like maybe this is Donald Trump attempting to impose his will upon a population that maybe doesn't want it. That said, I think that what Trump is thinking about is what happened in Venezuela, where you had what has been so far a very smooth transition of power from Maduro to the remaining part of the regime there. And I think at some point, what the U.S. is going to want is a stabilization of the situation. And one way to do that is to have leadership in place that maybe isn't a total break from the previous regime, but could in fact keep the country in a more stable and forward-moving place, and might be willing to do things like negotiate about the future of the nuclear program and the future of the missile program. But the Iranian people are going to be very, I think, insistent upon trying to pick that person themselves.
Yeah, we just got a pretty remarkable piece of news in the president tapping Senator Markwayne Mullin to be the next Secretary of Homeland Security, which is something that we're going to be covering throughout the day. And if you're just joining us, this just emerged in the last couple of moments, a red head on the terminal as the president reassigns Secretary Kristi Noem to an entirely different job and an organization and a new effort that's going to be announced this weekend. Something that we've been talking to Emily about as well, and we're going to have another update coming up from the White House. Just lastly, Emily, sometimes the most simple questions draw the most interesting answers. We've talked so much about the decentralized nature of the Iranian regime. Who is running Iran now?
So one of the things you really need to understand about Iran is that it is a full-fledged bureaucracy of a government. They have a succession plan in place for nearly every position. Most people who are in power inside Iran have really bought into the idea of the regime. That means that it's not a decapitation strike like you might have seen in Venezuela or elsewhere. There's going to be many, many layers down of people who are invested in a robust and fairly healthy bureaucracy. So in every position, I mean, even though the Israelis are saying they're going very deep inside the hierarchy of each organization, you're going to have people step up and sort of understand enough that they can keep the country going. I think it's pretty much anybody's guess at what point that starts to teeter and fracture from the inside and the government just can't continue to function. But you can guarantee that internal security is going to be their number one goal and their top priority.